Could we speak about the relation of Louise to antiquities, to old masters?
Well, Louise was very well educated. She got a classical liberal education growing up in Paris, and she was steeped in art history. Her husband was an art historian, Robert Goldwater.
For sure.
And but she wasn't interested in art history per se, and she never saw her work as commenting on it. So any affinities are, incidental to her psychological expression, And I think that, when Louise first came to Rome in 1967, she was coming to work in the marble ateliers of Pietrasanta. She had a studio there. But she stopped in Rome on her way and fell in love with it. She thought it was fantastic. And particularly Bernini in the Galleria Borghese. She wrote a letter to her husband saying it was like a dream to be here. And so I think she was always very responsive to it aesthetically, her sensitivity to, visual objects, to the visual realm, but it wasn't something that she had a special interest in, let's say.
But it's interesting to see, for example, the relation to the body, and some pieces of the body, the two legs, for example, which really look like a Rodin, in fact.
Sure. Well, look, the fragment from antiquity takes on a special meaning because it invites you to complete it imaginatively. You imagine the rest of the body. It's very suggestive, and Louise uses fragments of the body in a suggestive way too. In this show, we have hand poses, we have the legs of her assistant Jerry, and
yes.
Outside, actually, we have a wonderful piece from the Tuileries of the welcoming hands, those 6 hand
from
poses.
The Tuileries?
That's right. It's on loan for, I think, 6 months, a little bit longer than the show itself, partly as a result of the Olympics in Paris.
We need to know that. I need to go and see that.
We can go and take a look if you like.
Yes.
And it's,
No, but in Tuileries.
Yeah.
I mean.
No, they're here now in Borghese.
Okay.
They're in the garden, and they're not strictly they're not live cast. They're slightly enlarged, I think, by about a third, and that was because Louise wanted to give their relationship a kind of permanence, make it almost seem slightly monumental.
But in a way, she wanted to escape to classical art, no? And her husband too.
Well,
he was specialized in African art?
Well, her husband was an art historian and Louise was an artist, and it's almost like that, Louise said, I was surrounded, because of my husband, I was surrounded by art history, and it's very interesting, but it's not real life. And so she always drew that distinction between the way that she was working, which was starting from the world of emotion, her own emotions, which she often experienced at a kind of vertiginous level of intensity, and, the study of classical antiquity, of anthropology, which she was very interested in, but it wasn't the wellspring of her art, let's say.
And was it challenging for you to create this show?
I worked together with the 2 curators from Galleria Borghese, so I was sort of representing the bourgeois side. And,
yeah,
we
but
came
is
together.
it challenging, this background?
Oh, absolutely. The reason is, the Galleria Borghese in and of itself is already quite perfect. It's like a jewel box. And so how do you make a show in a place that doesn't need anything? And so I think the solution was to really invent these dialogues between Louise and the works that are already here. So every piece has been chosen with a view to establishing a dialogue between, a work by Louise and something by Bernini or by Canova or by the surrounding architecture, so that it has a raison d'etre and it isn't just, bringing 10 works by Louise and putting it down
but
here.
In a way, for example, in this room, there are all these portraits of kind of César, and in dialogue with that, you have the head, the trauma head. For me, it's like trauma head.
Well, it's coming
of
out
Louise Bourgeois.
Yeah, and Louise is working these are not portraits of specific people. They're not representations of power and status. They're not meant to cement a social identity. These are, expressions of a psychological situation, an emotional state. And, in some cases, they're genderless. It's not clear if it's necessarily a man or a woman. It's not important to Louise. It's, in a way, I think it's, they're much, much more subjective and, coming more out of the unconscious realm for Louise. So this coming together of conscious and unconscious is quite strong.
Yeah.
That's why we gave it the title.
But in a way, there's the glory represented by the antiquity, the official portrait, and all what's inside is here. And shown in 20th century.
Yeah, it's, what art making was in antiquity was also extremely, if you had told an artist working under, Octavius and Augustus Caesar that he was expressing himself. He said, no, absolutely not. That's not what art making was in
Of
classical
course,
antiquity.
it was showing the power, no?
It was about style, it was about form, but it was not about this idea like, well, I feel sad because someone left me and I have to write a song or do.
And my dad was not nice.
My dad was not nice, or whatever it may be. So that's really comes with Romanticism. That really is where that idea of art as personal expression comes to the fore. And so it's almost a different tradition. And yet Louise is always, I think that what this show demonstrates is how classical Louise can be, even in works that are unlike, that like the Cells, that are much more, you could say a more radical break with traditional media. They still fit in a quite classical register. So
Merci, monsieur.
I hope that helps.